McNichol. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Abby. Yeah, it's a wonderful new world we live in of how important our internet access is to be able to communicate with the world. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us this morning on what should be a very fascinating talk about one of our newest acquisitions. I'm sure for many of us, if we think back 20 years or 30 years, we would be surprised to know that this is such an important acquisition for the museum and a really fascinating story for the railway museums. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for your ongoing support of the Railway Museum and of Locomotion. During these unusual times, the support we receive from our patrons, friends, corporate supporters and stakeholders is more important than ever to help us ensure we can keep telling those epic railway stories throughout our museums. Whilst our museums have remained closed, we've been looking into new and innovative ways to keep in touch with our audiences. Our collections and inspirational stories remain open for all online. We've been providing fascinating blogs and video content to help keep you connected, alongside online workshops and talks such as this one. I'm proud of the team who've continued to work tirelessly throughout this period to keep our supporters, visitors and stakeholders engaged. You're probably aware of the recent government announcements to allow the safe reopening of our museums and galleries to the public. Many of you will have received an email outlining our initial plans of this yesterday, with Locomotion opening on the 28th of July and the National Railway Museum following the following week on the 4th of August. It's a huge amount of work to remobilise our museums, and whilst we're not ready to open our doors quite yet, we're working hard behind the scenes to ensure that we can do so in a way which is safe for all of our visitors and our colleagues, but also to ensure our financial sustainability going forward. Above all else, the health and safety of our visitors and colleagues remain our priority. When we do reopen, you'll notice some things will be a little bit different. Our priority is to provide safe, clean spaces for you to enjoy the museums you know and love, whilst maintaining social distancing. Please keep checking our websites for the most up-to-date information, because you'll begin to see we're opening on slightly different days and different hours. So it'd be helpful to just keep watching that and look at how you can book tickets to come along, free tickets that is, to come along to the museums. Obviously, through this period, our museums are facing a huge financial challenge. But if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we must continue to be as committed as ever to our mission of inspiring the innovators and engineers of the future. Thank you again for your support, and I'm now delighted to hand over to Anthony, who I'm sure you will enjoy his presentation. Over to you, Anthony.
Thanks, Judith. Well, good morning, and I would like to say it's great to see you all, but obviously I can't, but you can see me. What I wanted to do today was highlight our latest acquisition. As we said, a lot of people, Pacer has hit the headlines over recent months, and people have said, you know, why preserve them? Why keep them? We have Pacer 142001 in the collection, joined the collection in December last year, straight out of service with Northern. But a lot of heritage railways are now taking Pacers on and using them in the heritage sector. But so folks are saying, why keep one at all? Well, the Railway Museum's collection is, of course, about the everyday. It's not just about the widest, the fastest, the oldest, the youngest, the newest, the smallest. It's about the everyday story of railways. It's about the story of people, moving people around the country. And that's where we're going today. We're looking at the Pacer's progress. And if I can get the technology to work, says he, famous last words. Trying to move on to the next slide. And I think it's being slightly clockwork. long and short of it, the pacer is a very important part of railway history, much maligned by the passengers, much maligned by the media. It has nonetheless been part of the railway scene for 35 years. And actually, if we start going back into the full history of the pacer, the story of the pacer, it goes back to the 1960s. The 1960s was a time of transition for the railways, and it was a time of challenge. Motorways were coming in, containerization, all sorts of different things were happening in this world where the railway was still essentially, how should we put it, the steam-worked Victorian period infrastructure network. 1955, British Railways had created the modernisation plan and had hoped that this would be the way forward. But in the 1960s, there were still problems. You couldn't move people particularly fast with the motorway network coming in. The challenge for the railway was to improve on so many different fronts. And so in the early 1960s, about 1964, the British Railways, or British Rail, opened the Railway Technical Centre at Derby. And the Railway Technical Centre was looking at research in all areas, how to improve the industry, whether it was passenger comfort, locomotive technology, braking systems, the way that trains were controlled, everything was there. But one of the major areas they wanted to concentrate on and look into was how to speed up goods trains and how to make them work on, how could you go fast on an existing network? And the long and short of it was that goods trains were awkward things. You can't move goods particularly fast. It's heavy, it's lumpy, it's a nuisance, some of it's fragile. And the challenge being, if you try to make historic small four-wheel goods wagons go fast, they fall off the track. They bounce around, they damage your goods, they damage your infrastructure, and the customer really doesn't want to engage with railways again. So how do you make trains travel fast? So British Rail, through the Railway Technical Centre and the Research Centre at Derby, engaged a professional from the aerospace industry, Professor Alan Wickens. Now, Professor Alan Wickens came from a background of computer modelling. He came back from a background of trial and working out issues. So the Railway Technical Centre had made a small model of a goods wagon and wanted to see how it would behave at speed. So they made a 5th scale wagon and they put it on a test bed and they tried it out to see how it worked with computer modelling. They found out that it only could go so far with computer modelling and look at how it behaved on the full size. So they made adapted a full size wagon under frame and put it on a static test rig to see how it would behave at speed and see how it would work at 140 miles an hour. Now, 140 miles an hour is a speed that's completely, utterly out of. Oh, hang on. Sorry, folks. Is that now working on the sharing of the screen? I think my computer is completely, utterly, whether it's frozen.
Anthony, it's Judith here. I'm seeing you and the very beautiful Deltic behind you.
Right.
All we had was it was stuck on the front screen.
Yeah.
So I think clearly we're having a technical hitch. I suggest you keep talking on the areas you're talking about. If we can get it fixed, we will. If not, apologies to people. As Abby said at the start, these technical things are a challenge, but I think let's keep seeing you and carry on talking.
All I can say is it's a good job I had a shave this morning, isn't it? But there we are. Okay. I don't know if this is working, but we'll try it and see. I'll keep blathering nonetheless. And so Wickens,
sorry, Anthony. We are now seeing your screen, and we've got on the story.
This is what we wanted.
Goes back longer.
This is what we wanted. I shall ease back into it now. Forgive my slight blathering of desperation. So this is HSFV1, high-speed freight vehicle 1, under test at the Railway Technical Centre in Derby. it's a boring freight wagon. It's a boring goods wagon, but they're trying to see how it behaves. You can see it's rigged up to computers to see how it behaves at 100 miles an hour with the weight on it. So on this static test rig, they got it up to 140 miles an hour, and also out on the track, they took it up to 140 miles an hour and worked out that they could actually deliver high-speed freight safely with no damage to the goods by this particular vehicle. One of the key figures, like I say, was Professor Alan Wickens, and Professor Alan Wickens is much better known to many people as the guy behind APT, the Advanced Passenger Train Experimental. But of course, high-speed passengers are but one area that the railways sought to develop on. And the high-speed delivery of goods from HSFV1, moving things safely, showed that you could move goods and materials beyond freight alone. And there were loads of developments which we haven't got time to go into here, and I hope it could move chairs. I can hear moving around in the cafe at Locomotion. Nonetheless, the railway wanted to use the research from HSFV1 in far more ways than they did with just the APT and moving freight. And just as an aside, also in the National Collection now is HSFV1, High Speed Freight Vehicle 1. It's at Locomotion, currently on display, alongside APT, the thing which very much took the technology. The gentleman in that photograph is Kit Spackman. He was a tilt engineer, a development engineer on the APT project, and he was the man who made the advanced passenger train tilt as it went round corners at high speed. So there is HSFV1 in 2017 before it came into the collection. So next time you're at Locomotion and you see this, how should we put it, slightly scruffy looking piece of equipment with a big steel bar across the top of it, it is the reason that we have high speed travel to this day on the mainline network. And HSFV1 and the research that resulted from that led to the Mark III bogie of the Mark III carriages, some of which are still running around with high-speed trains now, and of course the APT. Much vaunted as a failure, but of course it wasn't. It was technology ahead of its time, and now the Pendolinos on West Coast are also running with the same technology from then. But the railway management in the 70s began to think, well, what else could we do with HSFV1's underframe? Yes, we can put it into goods trains. We can make our freight trains run fast, and we can run them safely, and we don't clog up the network with slow goods trains. But actually, we've got all these diesel rail cars from that 1955 modernisation plan, and they're all getting a bit long in the tooth. I mean, they're 20 odd years old now. What should we do? And so the railway said, well, let's look at replacing those modernisation plan rail cars with a rail car, a lightweight rail car, which is low cost, low impact, but very effective using that underframe from HSFV1 or a version thereof. And looking at low cost for light rural routes and suburban routes where a traditional DMU, diesel multiple unit, is too heavy. So enter LEV1, LEV1, Lightweight Experimental Vehicle 1. It looks like a bus. And that's actually because it is a bus. It's a Leyland National bus body on railway wheels, based on HSFV1, High Speed Freight Vehicle 1. Leyland were, at that stage, they've been nationalised, British Leyland, some of you will remember. They were nationalised in 1975. So in essence, by using BR Engineering Limited and British Rail to provide the underframe and Leyland providing the bodywork, you had two nationalised industries working with each other to create LEV1. And as you can see on the slide, it was towed at 100 miles an hour. I'd have wanted danger money for travelling in that thing at 100 miles an hour, but LEV1 entered the scene. And the development of LEV1, they tried a number of different bodies and a number of different underframes to try it out. LEV1 was built in 1979, and 5 years later, this led to the Pacer itself. Before we leave LEV1, it's also very much part of the National Collection. It's currently at the Wensleydale Railway, but we're working to bring it to Locomotion and have it on display in the near future, but I won't be drawn on any dates on that because, of course, we can't say when we can put it on display, but we recognise its point, its pivotal point. If you're a bus enthusiast or a railway enthusiast, it's the best of both worlds. But the scene is now set for a lightweight rail bus. It's an economic stopgap almost to prop up both British Rail and Leyland, but there it is. And this is the 141 Pacer. The body is quite literally a Leyland bus body built in Workington, and 20 odd of these vehicles were built. This is the 141 series. The 141s, they operated only until 1997 in the UK, but as you see in the slide, a number of them were sold to Iran. I think about a dozen of them went to Iran and were in use there until 2005. So, once again, you've got upcycling. Lightweight rail buses were used all across the world. The Pacer goes international. And the Pacer, this is a 142, which is the later version, which has got a wider body. If I just drop back there, you'll see the 141 is, as I say, quite literally a bus body. You can see the destination blind at the top on the left of that picture where the route number would be. So, the 59 to Barnsley potentially. But of course, that does limit the ability that you have to carry people. So the 142 Pacers, which are much wider there, they've got a much better vehicle capacity, and they were used on light rural routes and on suburban routes where heavy rail wasn't particularly profitable, so you need a cheap train. And they were also used in Cornwall and Devon on some of the branch lines down there, which is why they became a skipper. So Pacers were very much northern and Midlands, and skippers were southwestern. They came out in 1985, which happened to be the year that the 150th anniversary of the Great Western Railway was commemorated and celebrated. And so as a homage to the Great Western Railway, they were all painted in the chocolate and cream colours you can see there in 1985, 1986. And the Southwest hated them. They were noisy, they screeched as they went round curves, they bounced around, they had a lively ride. And by the late 80s, they were moved up to the northeast. And there you can see a picture which I took as a callow youth in 1988 at Newcastle Station of a skipper that had been cascaded up to Newcastle, but had yet to receive its regional railway's colours. Subsequently, there were other versions. There was a 143 and a 144. We won't go into those now, but they were all different versions of transmissions, different versions of the bodies. But the Pacer, as a concept, went around the world. In 1986, a Pacer was sent over to a trade expo in Vancouver. And it's, on this occasion, was one of the very few noted times that Margaret Thatcher rode on a train. She didn't ride on a train from Burnley to Blackburn. She didn't ride on a train from London to Grantham, but she rode on a Pacer in Vancouver. There were no export orders forthcoming as a result of it, but you can see it there, first off being transported on a flat wagon across the Rockies to Vancouver, and then on the top right picture you can actually see it on trial, demonstrating its paces. Oh dear, that pun wasn't meant there, but it came out anyway. But there you can see it in operation near Vancouver. And then the bottom right picture was the one export success of a kind for the Pacer. It's a straightforward 141, which was exported to Malaysia, of all places. A single two-car unit, and operating on 3'6" gauge, which is the Malaysian standard gauge, so narrower than the UK gauge. But there it is, nonetheless, a Pacer in Malaysia, and it's not in use now, but it's hanging around in a derelict form. However, I am resisting all requests from Pacer preservation groups to have it re-imported as part of the national collection. One Pacer is enough for anybody. One of the Achilles heels for the Pacer wasn't just that it was bouncing around and it was a lightweight ride, but that mechanically they were unreliable in 1985 to 1988. The Leyland engines and the transmissions were not particularly successful. Leyland, as we said, was a nationalised industry. Through the 80s, we saw a lot of privatisation happen as a result of changes of government. And so in 1988, just around 1988, Volvo took on Leyland themselves. So Leyland were privatised, became part of the Volvo empire, and that also meant they inherited the warranty for the Pacers and the mechanical parts. So from 1988 onwards, there was a programme of renewal of engines and gearboxes and transmissions, which saw the Pacer have a new lease of life, quite literally, and they became the success that they were. And I use the word success inverted commas because, you know, if they weren't a success, they wouldn't have lasted in service as long as they have now. You can see on the right-hand picture there that in certain Pacers, the seating was upgraded. They went from bus seats to the airline-style seating. It just gave that extra degree of passenger comfort. And the other thing that that extended the life of the Pacer was privatisation itself in 1992 of British Rail, which meant that there was no consistent approach to rolling stock replacement. We'd seen how the Pacer itself comes out of the desire to renew rolling stock after the modernisation plan, the first generation DMU, as many enthusiasts call them. The first generation DMU was replaced after 25 years by the Pacer. There was nothing planned to replace Pacers, and thus they carried on. And Newcastle, Manchester, I can remember going to interview at Leeds University with a Pacer, and I don't think I've ever felt quite so unwell in my life ever before or since on a train. But they still did the job, and they were reliable, they were available, they were low cost, low maintenance, and they just kept the railways running. And we couldn't see an end to the Pacer on the national network. They were there forever, and they bounced around, even on the line from Darlington to Locomotion, where I've worked for the last 16 years. It's always been a Pacer. They're just there. It's the everyday train. However, in 2014, we saw George Osborne come up with the concept of the Northern Powerhouse, and I think it's perhaps something that the only train that the only train that Maggie Thatcher, when she was PM, travelled upon, or one of the few trains that she travelled upon, was mentioned by a later Chancellor of the Exchequer in his Northern Powerhouse speech. And in 2014, he actually said these Pacer trains were out of date and would be replaced. And so the Pacers began a gradual phasing out, because of course they still needed replacements. You can't replace a train unless you've got something to put in place instead of it. One of the things that was a very fortuitous happening during that time, though, from 2014 to now, was that we took HSFV1, which you've seen already, into the collection. And Professor Alan Wickens, who's now in his 80s, wanted to come to Locomotion and see it. Now, very intelligent man, incredible chap, and there he is on a Pacer at Darlington Station explaining how the suspension works. I would try and explain it now, but I don't have the time particularly to go delving into it. But we were fortunate enough to record him both on a Pacer and at Chiltern looking at HSFV1 to understand exactly the nature of what made it what it is. But the everyday began to pass into history all of a sudden last year. There were new trains began to be cascaded and delivered to the Northern system and the Northern network. And the Pacers started to be moved from from everyday service to, how should we put it, some of the outposts of the network. And so therefore, Darlington to Bishop Auckland, we never saw any difference, but there were a lot more Pacers running into Newcastle, around Heaton, out to Hull, and across the Pennines over to to Carlisle. It's quite funny that you know, you've got something there that still has windows that you can open by hand. You know, in this age of where we all expect aircon, and actually in the current crisis, that has been a bit of a lifesaver for those Pacers that remain. The last pacers that were due to be taken out of service have been reinstated. 12 pacers have been put back into traffic because you can open the window and air can circulate as well as social distancing around it. So this is around, I think, November last year at York Station, the everyday passing into history. 2 pacers side by side, but across the platform you can see one of the new units just aside of one of the units that was replacing them. And much as the enthusiast was mourning the passing of the HST 125 with much fanfare up to November last year and December with the special train that came through York, the pacers were pretty much just slipping away and disappearing, with the result that it was said on the Northern network that all pacers would be out of service and gone by December the 15th, I think it was. I think that was a Saturday, and that was when the timetables changed and pacers were to go. So this is actually the last time I saw a pacer. I travelled on a pacer, coming up from York, getting off the train at Shildon, and I'd got myself into the habit of taking a picture most evenings. And there it is. That's the last pacer that I saw, or that I travelled on, from Darlington to Shildon. And on the 18th of December, a pacer rolled through the gates of locomotion, which was something we really didn't think we'd see quite as soon as we did. A pacer preserved. 142001, 142001. Why did we choose 142001? Well, the Railway Heritage Designation Advisory Board, formerly the Railway Heritage Committee, had met a number of years ago and convened a committee to work, a subcommittee to work on the selection of second generation diesel units. And I sat on that for a number of meetings, and a 142, a class 142 type was designated. 142001 was chosen. Why? Well, when you've got over 100 trains to choose from, it can be a bit arbitrary. None of them are particularly special. None of them were particularly famous, apart from perhaps the one that had been to Vancouver that Maggie had travelled on. But was that a reason enough to preserve it? And actually what we wanted to show was the way that the pacer had progressed from the Leyland National Bus. So 142001 we selected because it is one of the most original in terms of what's left. It carries its final Northern Railways, Northern colour scheme, but internally the seats are still bus seats, the engines are still as they were, all the fixtures and fittings are as they would have been, not necessarily 35 years ago when the vehicle went into service, but certainly as it was when it came out of service and when it was refurbished in 1988 with the new engine. So there you can see the internal layout of 3 and 2 bus seats side by side. Very clean because our conservation team really set to with it. Having had it straight out of service, there were all sorts of things and we really didn't want empty coffee cups and bubble gum and newspapers and whatnot. And it just came in filthy straight out of service. So the conservation team worked absolute wonders with it, and there you can see it's now fit for display, fit for the museum. We've been undertaking familiarisation trips on the site at the museum with it, and there you can see the view from the driver's seat looking down the track, the demonstration track at locomotion, with the main line to Darlington and Bishop Auckland on the left, which the pacer would have known very well during its time in service. We do intend to keep ours in operation, but very controlled operation as befits a museum piece. Pacers are seen by a lot of heritage railways as a cheap source of moving people around, and all sorts of heritage railways are having pacers, adding pacers to their fleets, and I have to hold my hand up and say I can't quite see how a pacer fits with the somewhere like the Keighley-Worth Valley Railway, where it's all very nice gas lamps and 1950s BR, but the railways see them as tools to do a job and to carry people and to carry them cheaply. However, ours is a designated pacer. It's designated by the Railway Heritage Designation Advisory Board, which means that it is the example for the nation. It's modern history. And one day it will be, it already has people coming to see it. They are, well, before lockdown, people wanted to know when we were going to be able to offer rides with it. Obviously, we need to undertake full training of our staff and volunteers, not just in operating it, but the maintenance of it. But Northern have been helping us with that. And as I say, this is the National Collection Pacer. It's part of our heritage. It's there for all time. And it's modern history. And for everyone who says that they were failures, well, they lasted 35 years in service. And actually, I can't see an end. With the reinstatement of another 12 vehicles into service, who knows when the final axe will fall on the Pacer. We were on the lookout for some spare parts for this one. And I got in touch with the 2 scrapyards that have been breaking them up, looking for spares to see what we might be able to put aside in terms of consumables. And the scrapyard said, well, we don't anticipate having a Pacer again for quite a while. So who knows? But ladies and gentlemen, that is a very quick squiz through the Pacer's progress. Thank you for your patience while I scrabbled with technology. And if you've got any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them. Thank you.
That was really interesting, Anthony. Thank you. I feel like I've learnt loads. Who knew that the Pacer was such a global empire? We've had a couple of comments really on the Q&A session, so I thought we'd just jump straight into those. We've had a comment from Philip, which just says he doesn't recall the 141s actually being called Pacers within the industry. He said, in fact, he thinks they nicknamed them skaters after one picked up its wheels and hit the buffers at York. I don't know if you've got any insight on that at all, Anthony?
No, but I can believe that, Philip. Yes, you're right. The 141s were not particularly Pacers as such as that trade name, but they certainly would have skated, and that's one of the challenges we have with operating hours at the museum now. The 142001 was in service until the 14th of December. Came to the NRM, or came to locomotion on the 18th of December. And it had its wheels turned I think it was at Leeds. It had its wheels turned on the 11th of December, precisely because somebody had been very heavy on the brake and the thing had locked up and skated into a station. And that's something we want our teams, our crews on the trains to be very careful with it on site, because we can't afford to send it away for its tyres to be turned every time somebody locks it up and makes it go sliding.
Fab, that's great, Anthony. Thank you. We've got another comment from Philip as well here, which is just about the CL142s. He says they were withdrawn from the southwest because they couldn't actually cope with the branch line curvature, which led to a high failure rate, and how he actually hosted the introduction of the Pacers proper into North Yorkshire on the 2nd of July 1986, so just had an anniversary. He said his recollection is how harsh the ride was on the jointed track, and that apparently it's worth recalling that their introduction, it was a bit of a financial necessity as well, because there wasn't any money within BR's settlement for anything else. So he thinks really it could be said to have saved many branch lines. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, so that's very true. I mean, in cantering through the full story of the Pacer in 20 minutes, I didn't want to not bore, that's the wrong phrase, but I didn't want to go on into great detail. But you're absolutely right. They were there as the saviours of a lot of the lighter branch lines, and yeah, the line from Darlington to Bishop Auckland is a case in point. The railway was there. As for the rough ride on the 60-foot jointed rail, yes, I agree completely and wholeheartedly. As I say, the journey I had from Sheffield to Leeds, the thing bounced around so much, and also if anyone's been, I would say, so unfortunate as to have travelled one from Scarborough around to Beverley and Driffield, etc., then yeah, likewise, it's a very lively ride, and I think what we didn't say is that a nickname for a lot of people that have given to Pacers is nodding donkeys. I think that's also quite appropriate.
Fab, thanks, Anthony. Philip has actually put his hand up. I didn't know, Philip, if we unmute you, if you had anything you wanted to add at all. Oh, I think the technology might have abandoned us then again as well. Philip, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes, I just wondered if you had anything to add. You've put some really good insight in the comments there.
I think Anthony's covered the points particularly. It's interesting, when we launched it in July 1986, we were also relaunching the line from Hull to Scarborough using the Pacer to do it as the world's coastline. And of course, it's worth bearing in mind that with the much greater introduction of continuously welded rail since, then the problems of the harsh ride have largely disappeared, because even most branch lines now are actually CWR for much of their length. So it's a sort of love-hate relationship I think I had with them as a railway operator, but there's no doubt that they were a fundamental part of recent railway history and an essential element in keeping the railway network to what it is today.
Well, that's fab, Philip. Thank you. Really useful to have that bit of insight from you as well.
I think, Philip, when things begin to ease a little, I think we ought to come and record you and have a proper chat with you about your experience with them, because this is the sort of story that we need to be able to help with our interpretation so much better.
Oh, happy to do that.
Thank you. That'd be great.
Oh, fab. That's wonderful, Philip. Thank you so much. We have got another couple of questions just coming through on the Q&A. Someone has asked, why did it take so long to replace the Pacers on busy commuter routes?
There were no other trains to do so. And like I said, under privatisation, there was no concerted programme to make new rolling stock. There was no saying you must replace trains after so many years, you need to do this. And how should we put it? People put up with them. I put up with them. I used to commute from the top end of Bolton, sometimes from Blackburn down to Manchester when I worked at the Science Museum in Manchester. We mainly had sprinters then, but you were commuters, you put up with what you have. They did the job, the wheels kept going round. But eventually, new trains coming in from other providers began to put a bit of a spotlight on the Pacer and say, well, actually, if you have these on, like the electric trains going from Leeds out to Ilkley, you've got these, they're so much better, they're so much nicer. Shouldn't something be done about the Pacers? But it took until 2014 with George Osborne and the Northern Powerhouse speech to begin to sound the death knell for the Pacer. And of course, that's 2014. And like I say, we're now here in 2020, and there's a couple of dozen of the things still running around.
Fab, Anthony, thank you. We've just got another couple of questions coming through. So one of them, you mentioned that Pacers have had certain colour schemes. How many different colour schemes have there been, and what's sort of the meaning behind that? Right,
well, yes, as many people will know, throughout privatisation, there have been a lot of different train operating companies. Some have gone, some have endured. And even under British Rail, the sectorisation. I grew up in the 1970s when all the British Rail trains were blue or blue and grey. And the Pacers began to break that mould. 1985, 1986 was what they called the regional railways. There were two shades of blue with a white stripe up the side. But then you had things like the West Yorkshire Passenger Transport Executive, which had a red colour scheme with cream up the side. You've seen that the skippers in Cornwall and Devon, they were chocolate and cream. Newcastle on Tyneside, the Metro, they were orange and white, just like the Metro cars. To be honest, the answer to that question is hand honestly up at the moment. I don't know. I need to do a bit of digging in that, but it's well in excess of a dozen different liveries, because of course, Northern, Transpennine, all these different operators, they've all had changes of brand, changes of colour, changes of image, and so is the Pacer. It's our plan to keep 142001 in its as received condition for the time being. People have said we perhaps ought to put it back into the initial regional railways style, the two-tone blue with a white stripe. That may be something to be done in the future, but at the moment, I quite like being able to show it as it was at the end of its life. But of course, we have to bear in mind as a museum that colour scheme on it isn't actually paint; it's a vinyl wrap. So that presents our conservation team with an extra challenge of how does one conserve and preserve vinyl wraps? Answers on a postcard, please. But yeah, it's a good it's a good question, and it's a good example of where I need to do a little more research come the time when we're ready to put the unit on display.
That actually segues really interestingly just into the next question, really. So what, thinking about what our longer term plans are, what do we intend to do with the Pacer in the long term? Is it going to stay at Shildon? What are we going to do with it? Any insight into that at all?
Well, last year we created and published the operating vehicle strategy for the National Collection. Now, previously, we've not had any coherent overall strategy of how we look after our collection. If I may speak candidly, it's had a bit of a toy box approach over many years, and there's been this desire to say, let's get things running, whereas actually we need to look at what we do. Well, we needed to look at what we could do well, and what we didn't need to do. And in drawing up that operating vehicle strategy, the Pacer, even before it was part of the collection, the Pacer was identified as being something that we could continue to operate, because to understand, like I say, it's now 35 years old, and people commuting to locomotion, people commuting to the Railway Museum now have a very different experience of rail travel to what they do on a Pacer. So to be able to have that contrast and say, this is 2020, and look at this and now experience it. There's no aircon, there's no it is a bus on rails. It's a completely different experience, but it's also, railways are about the shared experience of travel. So we all remember Pacers, but in time to come, our children, our grandchildren will not remember. So it's like the Mark I carriage, or anything else in the collection, but that it becomes memory. But for the time being, whilst it's within living memory, it's quite good to be able to share that experience and say to folks, this is what it's like, or this is what it was like. On a purely practical note, it's actually a very useful train for both York and Shildon. It can start at the push of a button, and if you have a school party in, then it's an instant train without having to worry about preparing a diesel or steam locomotive and getting a large crew together. So yeah, twofold. We want to keep operating it so that people can enjoy it, but we also want to keep operating it in order to tell its own story and make the contrast between the other trains that people can either get on as static vehicles at the museums or have a ride in the South Yard or on site at locomotion.
Fab, thank you, Anthony. We've just had a comment here just from Tim, one of our patrons, just saying that he thought the presentation was really interesting and really excellent, and just saying that it's really encouraging to hear what we're going to be doing with it, and that we're going to keep maintaining it for sort of our occasional running demos as well, which is nice. Let me just go down. Got a couple of other questions as well. So one of our attendees has asked, they've heard some news reports that Pacers are going to be returning to the tracks. Is that
Yes.
true? Have you got any behind the scenes knowledge?
Yes, like I said during the presentation, coronavirus has given the Pacers a new lease of life, and certainly in the northwest of England, another 12 Pacers have been taken out of storage and put into use on Lancashire and Greater Manchester commuter routes, because, like I say, they've got windows you can open, you can enact social distancing a lot more easily with a Pacer. And yeah, I don't see an end date coming for those units anytime soon. We're not ready to lend 142001 back to the mainline railway anytime soon. But actually, as the vehicles get used more, it makes their desirability for heritage lines less, because they will be worn out by the time that comes for them to be taken out of service. So I'm afraid that it probably looked like a one-way journey for most of those remaining Pacers. But it is very interesting to see, from the great rush of getting rid of Pacers in the last 6 months, there were massive trains of them going from Newcastle down to either storage or to the scrapyards. Those cascades of Pacers has now stopped, and as our questioner says quite rightly, a number of pacers have been reinstated and are going back into service.
Fab, thanks Anthony. I think we've just got one final question here and then I think we'll probably start wrapping up. So the question is, I understand pacers were being gifted to local communities to be transformed for alternative uses. Just wondered if you'd heard of any interesting ideas or interesting sort of creative things that have been happening?
Yeah, the pacers are owned by a couple of the leasing companies, Porterbrook and Angel. And last year when they knew the pacers were going out, Porterbrook, I think it was Porterbrook, put in for community competitions for people to ask for pacers to be used as, well, any form of different use other than a train. And there was a competition, and it was judged by people like Tim Dunn, Peter Waterman, and various folks, as well as those from within the industry. I think Sir Peter Hendy may have been on it as well. And a lot of them, not a lot, but I think the winning ones, some of them have gone off to be community centres, extensions to community facilities. A couple of them have gone to be, I think, healthcare facilities, clinics in local areas where it's not cost effective to put a building up, but a pacer sitting on a piece of track, in essence, is a roof over your head to be able to provide things for communities. And I've got a feeling there might be one earmarked to be a library somewhere. So there's some really interesting alternative uses for pacers going on. I think Mrs. Coulls won't let me have one as a garden shed, and I'm not entirely sure I'd want one, to be honest, but it might make quite a good greenhouse for somebody.
That's great, Anthony, thank you. I'm really glad to hear that you won't be getting one in your garden either. So I think that's all the questions we had, unless anybody has anything else they'd like to ask at all. So just to really wrap up and say thank you to the panellists for their time. Thank you, Judith, and thank you, Anthony, for taking the time to join us this morning. That was really interesting. If any of our listeners have any feedback or anything they'd like, please do get in touch with me. But mostly just to say from me, thank you very much for your time this morning and for joining us.